3:15 p.m. The shriek of the final bell was a starting pistol for a race Maya Alistair always lost. It signaled the daily dissolution of flimsy adult supervision, the moment the hallways of Northgate High became a lawless territory ruled by the casual cruelty of teenagers. She moved with a practiced economy of motion, her shoulders curved inward, her gaze fixed on the grimy linoleum tiles. The goal was simple. Get from her locker to the east exit in under 90 seconds, a ghost in a sea of jostling bodies and echoing shouts. Today she was too slow. The metallic slam of her locker door echoed with a terrifying finality. A wall of denim and cheap cologne blocked her path. Kyle Brogan, with his smirking, vacant eyes, leaned against the adjacent lockers, flanked by his two shadows, Liam and Chris. The air thickened, smelling of stale sweat and the sweet, chemical tang of aerosol deodorant. "Look what we have here," Kyle drawled, his voice a lazy instrument of torment. Little Songbird lost her way. He snatched the sketchbook from under her arm. Maya's breath hitched. It was the only place she felt safe. Liam ripped it from Kyle's hand, flipping through the pages with mock reverence. "Ooh, look, more weird birds. You gonna fly away, Maya?" The laughter was sharp, a sound designed to chip away at her composure. Chris uncapped an aerosol can and, with a theatrical flourish, sprayed a long, greasy stripe down the back of her gray hoodie. The cold, wet shock of it made her flinch, but the hiss of the can was worse, a snake's warning in the sudden quiet of the emptying corridor. Her eyes darted down the hall, pleading. She saw him. Mr. Henderson, the history teacher, stood at his classroom door, a briefcase in one hand. Their eyes met for a fraction of a second. In that instant, Maya saw a flicker of something. Annoyance, maybe pity, before his gaze slid away. He turned, stepped inside his room, and pulled the heavy wooden door shut. The click of the latch was a gunshot in the silence. It was the sound of abandonment, the sound of the system looking the other way. Maya squeezed her eyes shut, the laughter of the boys washing over her, the chemical stench filling her lungs. She felt utterly, terrifyingly alone. Miles away, in a quiet garage on the other side of town, a different sound answered the silence. The low, guttural cough of a V-twin engine turning over. A Harley-Davidson, its chrome catching the afternoon sun. Its owner, a man polishing a timing cover, didn't know Maya. He didn't know her name or her pain. But the deep, rhythmic rumble of his machine was a vibration of order in a world of chaos. A mile from him, another engine fired up, then another. They were disparate notes, lonely sounds in the suburban sprawl. But they were part of a distant, humming chord, a promise of a reckoning that was yet to be composed. Daniel Alistair knew the smell of defeat. It smelled like burnt oil, stripped bolts, and the metallic tang of his own sweat after a 12-hour shift. But tonight, it smelled like the cheap, cloying aerosol clinging to his daughter's clothes. Maya had stumbled through the door, her face a pale, tear-streaked mask, and collapsed into his arms. The story came out in shuddering sobs, a disjointed narrative of stolen sketchbooks, mocking laughter, and the final, deafening click of a teacher's door. He held her, his large, calloused hands, usually so adept at fixing broken things, feeling clumsy and useless against the fragility of her shaking shoulders. He put her to bed with a cup of tea and a promise. "We'll sort this." The right way. The next morning, he drove them to Northgate High. The building loomed, a brick and glass monument to indifference. In the sterile office of Vice Principal Thompson, the air was stale with the scent of photocopier toner and condescension. Thompson, a man whose suit was as bland as his expression, listened with a practiced patience that felt more insulting than outright dismissal. "Kids can be kids, Mr. Alistair," he said, steepling his fingers. "High school is a tough social environment. Kyle Brogan is one of our star athletes. Perhaps Maya is being a bit sensitive." Daniel placed a printed photo of the graffiti on Maya's locker on the desk. "Does this look like sensitivity to you?" Thompson glanced at it, his eyes betraying no emotion. He swiveled in his leather chair and tapped at his keyboard, pulling up Maya's file. I see here Maya has missed 6 days this semester, mostly Mondays. That's a pattern the school counselor finds concerning. The pivot was seamless, masterful in its bureaucratic cruelty. In an instant, Maya was no longer the victim. She was the problem, the sensitive girl, the truant. We'll have a word with Kyle, Thompson conceded, a verbal pat on the head. But I suggest you also have a word with Maya about her attendance. They left the office. The promise Daniel had made his daughter feeling hollow and foolish. His next stop was the local police precinct, a place of beige walls and buzzing fluorescent lights. Officer Miller, a young cop with a weary face, took the report. He typed with 2 fingers, his gaze drifting to the clock on the wall. Name-calling a little pushing, he summarized, his voice flat. It's a school matter, really. We can't dedicate resources to policing hallway disputes. Daniel pushed a piece of paper across the counter. They followed her halfway home yesterday, Miller sighed. Did they threaten her? Did they touch her? Look, sir, I can file this as minor harassment, but without a credible threat, it's just going to sit in a folder. The report was filed. A number was assigned. A piece of paper was added to a stack of other papers, a testament to a system designed to manage, not to solve. Driving home, Daniel felt a cold fury settle in his gut. He had done everything by the book. He had followed the chain of command. He had trusted the process. And the process had told him, in no uncertain terms, that his daughter's pain was an acceptable level of collateral damage in the grand, grinding machinery of public education and law enforcement. He was alone, a single father against an edifice of apathy, and the walls were closing in. Their apartment was small, but it was a sanctuary. 2 bedrooms, a kitchen that was more of a corridor, and a living room filled with the quiet history of their lives. On the refrigerator, a constellation of magnets held up photos of a woman with Maya's eyes and a smile that seemed to radiate warmth even from behind glossy paper. Laura, gone 5 years now, but her presence was woven into the fabric of the place. Daniel saw her in the way Maya tilted her head when she was concentrating on a drawing, in the stubborn set of her jaw when she was upset. He worked as a mechanic at a small, independent garage, a job that paid the bills and kept his hands busy, but left his mind too much time to worry. The scent of gasoline and grease that clung to his clothes was the smell of their survival. He was a man of quiet principles, forged during a 4-year stint in the Army as a vehicle mechanic. He believed in order, in maintenance, in doing a job right the first time. You follow the manual. You torque the bolts to spec. You don't take shortcuts. He was trying to apply the same logic to raising his daughter, but her heart was a far more complex engine than anything he'd ever worked on. Before, Maya's energy had filled every corner of the apartment. The scratch of her charcoal pencils, the low hum of her singing along to the radio. Her sketchbook was her world, a place where she could conjure griffins and phoenixes from graphite and paper. Her drawings of birds were astonishingly detailed, each feather rendered with an almost scientific precision. She dreamed of being a wildlife illustrator. That world was shrinking. The sketchbook now lay closed on her nightstand, a silent rebuke. Her room, once a vibrant mess of art supplies and books, was now perpetually tidy and dark, the curtains often drawn in the middle of the afternoon. She picked at her food, her appetite gone. The light in her eyes, the one that reminded him so much of Laura, was dimming. The cost of the bullying wasn't measured in bruises or broken possessions. It was measured in stolen joy. It was the silence at the dinner table. It was the way she startled at the sound of the phone ringing. It was the new, razor-thin crack in her voice when she said she was fine. Daniel's meticulous nature now found a new purpose. He created a file, a simple manila folder labeled Northgate inside. He placed a log of every incident, with dates and times. He printed out the smirking, cruel comments from the fake social media profile they'd created in her name. He took a high-resolution photo of her hoodie, the greasy stripe of aerosol a stark wound against the gray fabric. He documented Vice Principal Thompson's exact words, Officer Miller's badge number. The file grew thicker, a paper monument to his powerlessness. It was his manual for a machine he didn't know how to fix, but he followed the steps anyway because that was all he knew how to do. He was a mechanic, and something in his daughter's life was broken. He would find the right tool or he would forge one himself. The cold dread that had been a low hum in Daniel's chest began to sharpen into a constant, piercing siren. The digital attacks escalated, becoming more personal, more vicious. Anonymous messages appeared on a community forum, spreading lies about Maya, twisting her quiet nature into something sinister and strange. They called her a freak, a weirdo, a ghost. The words were pixels on a screen, but they landed like stones. Daniel printed every single one, the black ink a permanent record of their poison. He added them to the folder, which was now nearly an inch thick. He sent a registered letter to the school superintendent, including copies of the most damning evidence and a formal request for intervention. He detailed the school's inaction, Thompson's dismissive attitude, and the growing psychological toll on his daughter. 2 weeks later, a response arrived. It was a crisp, impersonal letter on district letterhead, a masterpiece of bureaucratic non-commitment. It thanked him for his correspondence and assured him that the matter is being handled in accordance with district policy. It was signed not by the superintendent, but by an administrative assistant. The system wasn't just failing. It was mocking him with its procedural emptiness. Then, the digital threats bled into the physical world. One Thursday afternoon, Maya called him from the library, her voice trembling. "Dad, they followed me. Kyle and his friends. They're outside." Daniel left work, tires squealing out of the garage lot. By the time he arrived, they were gone. But the fear they'd left behind was a tangible thing, clinging to Maya like a second skin. That night, the sanctuary was breached. A sharp crack echoed through their small apartment around midnight. Daniel bolted upright in bed, his heart hammering against his ribs. He ran to Maya's room. She was sitting up, her face illuminated by the streetlight pouring through a spiderweb of fractured glass in her window. On the floor lay a small, jagged rock. It was a small crack, easily repaired, but its significance was immense. The line had been crossed. The ugliness was no longer confined to the school hallways or the anonymous forums of the internet. It was here, in their home. It had shattered their peace, literally. Daniel felt a surge of pure, primal rage, a feeling he hadn't experienced since his time in the service. He wanted to find those boys, to show them what real fear felt like. But he looked at his daughter, huddled under her blankets, and the rage cooled into a hard, dense resolve. He spent the rest of the night in a chair by her door, watching the empty street below. The police came, took another report, and left. "Probably just random vandalism," the officer said with a shrug. "Happens all the time," but Daniel knew it wasn't random. He took a photo of the cracked pane of glass, the rock lying on the carpet, and placed the printout on the very top of his file. The evidence was irrefutable. The system was broken beyond repair. He had followed every rule, and in return, his daughter was a prisoner in her own home. The frustration was a physical weight, pressing down on him, suffocating him. He had run out of official channels. He had run out of patience. He had run out of hope in the institutions he was taught to trust. Defeated, Daniel found himself walking into the local VFW post on a Tuesday night. The place was dimly lit, smelling of stale beer and old wood, a haven for men who understood the language of silent burdens. He didn't go there to talk, just to sit in the quiet company of ghosts and try to think. He ordered a beer and nursed it, the thick manila folder sitting on the bar stool beside him like an unwanted companion. The bartender, a weary-looking man named George, nodded at the folder. "Tax audit." Daniel gave a short, bitter laugh. Worse, and then it all spilled out. The bullying, the school's indifference, the police reports, the cracked window. He spoke in a low, tired monotone, not looking for sympathy, just needing to give the weight of it a voice. At the far end of the bar, a man sat nursing a glass of water. He was older, with a graying beard and eyes that had seen more than the inside of a VFW hall. He wore a clean but road-worn leather vest adorned with patches. A large one on the back depicted a stylized eagle with wings of steel, clutching a wrench and a lightning bolt. "Iron Guardians MC," it read. Beneath it, a smaller patch, Sergeant Major, Rhett, he listened without expression, his gaze steady. When Daniel finally fell silent, the man picked up his glass and walked down the bar. He didn't loom or intimidate. He simply pulled up the stool next to Daniel. "I heard you," he said, his voice a low rumble. "My name's Frank. Most call me Sarge." Daniel nodded, wary. Daniel, Sarge gestured with his chin toward the folder. "You documented it all?" "Every last thing," Daniel said, his voice raspy. "Followed the chain of command." "Did it by the book." Sarge nodded slowly, a flicker of understanding in his eyes. He recognized the cadence of a man who believed in procedure, even when it failed him. "Let me see." Hesitantly, Daniel opened the folder. He didn't show the emotional parts, the cruel words, or the photo of Maya's face. He showed the process, the log of incidents, the official email from Thompson, the copy of the registered letter to the superintendent, the police report numbers, the final, damning photo of the shattered window. Sarge studied each page, his expression unreadable. He wasn't looking at the story of a bullied girl. He was reading an after-action report of a systemic failure. He saw the documented negligence, the abdication of responsibility at every level. When he got to the photo of the window, he paused, his thumb tracing the lines of the fracture. He looked up, and for the first time, Daniel saw something other than calm assessment in his eyes. He saw a cold, disciplined anger. "A child's home," Sarge said softly, as if speaking to himself. "There are lines." He closed the folder and pushed it gently back toward Daniel. "We have a code in our club," he explained, his voice even. "We don't look for trouble. We don't engage in vigilantism. But we stand for those who can't stand for themselves, especially the families of those who've served. We believe in presence." In accountability, he stood up and placed a hand on Daniel's shoulder. It wasn't a gesture of pity, but of solidarity. No child should be afraid to go to school. No family should feel unsafe in their own home. You did your part, Daniel. You followed the rules. Now, the community is going to follow a few of its own. It was a catalyst. The moment when one man's quiet, desperate persistence intersected with a code of honor forged in barracks and on long, lonely highways. The fight was no longer Daniel's alone. Sunday, 9 p.m. Sarge sat at a simple wooden desk in his garage, the gleaming chrome of his Road King behind him. He picked up his phone and made a single call to his club's vice president. "It's a code, Aurelia," he said, his voice calm and steady. The name was chosen for a reason. Aurelia was a genus of moon jellyfish, seemingly fragile, but part of a massive, silent, coordinated bloom that could change the very nature of the water around it. It was their designation for a non-confrontational, protective action in support of a child. The message went out. A text chain, simple and direct. Code Aurelia. Northgate High. 0700 Monday. Stage at the old cannery. Peaceful presence only. No colors, just vests. Stand for the 1 inch. The digital signal spread like ripples in a pond. In a quiet suburban home, a high school history teacher, a man known to his club as Professor, read the text and nodded, setting his alarm for 4:30 a.m. In the cab of a long-haul truck barreling down I-5, a grizzled man named Diesel saw the message on his mounted phone. He checked his logbook, calculated his hours, and rerouted toward Northgate. A retired police detective, a pediatric nurse, a union electrician, a software engineer. Their phones lit up one by one. They were the Iron Guardians and members of 3 other Allied veterans clubs. They were not outlaws. They were fathers, grandfathers, and brothers, bound by shared service and a common code. The montage of mobilization began, a silent, coordinated symphony of readiness across 3 counties. Leather vests were pulled from closets, each one a life story told in patches. 1st Cavalry Division, 101st Airborne, 3rd Infantry Division, ribbons for service in Kuwait, Bosnia, Afghanistan, Iraq. These were not costumes. They were credentials. In garages and sheds, engines coughed to life. The low, synchronized rumble of dozens of V-twins, a sound that spoke not of menace, but of imminent, unstoppable purpose. Headlights sliced through the pre-dawn darkness, converging from all directions on the designated staging area, an abandoned cannery on the industrial edge of town. The count came in via text messages to Sarge. South Chapter, 12 riders in Valley Charter, were 20 strong, East Side vets rolling in with 15 by 6 a.m. The cannery parking lot was a sea of polished chrome and quiet, disciplined men. They drank coffee from thermoses, their voices low, their movements efficient. There was no boasting, no talk of confrontation. They were a force assembling, not a gang. Sarge walked through the ranks, giving quiet instructions. We form a corridor. No one speaks to the students. No one revs an engine. We are a visible sign of support. That is all. He made one more call. To Sarah Jenkins, a young, hungry reporter for a local news station. He'd met her when she covered the VFW's Toys for Tots drive, and he'd been impressed by her integrity. He gave her the time and the place. He didn't give her the backstory, just a single, powerful hook. A community has decided that one of its children deserves to go to school without fear. You might want to be there at 6:45 a.m. Sarge raised his hand. 57 engines fired up in near-perfect unison. The sound was a deep, resonant hum, a promise kept. They rolled out of the parking lot in a staggered 2x2 formation, a river of steel and resolve flowing toward the quiet, unsuspecting streets surrounding Northgate High. Monday, 7:15 a.m. The sun was just beginning to burn the morning mist off the manicured lawns surrounding Northgate High. The usual suburban symphony was playing. The slam of car doors, the cheerful chatter of students, the distant whine of a leaf blower. Then, a new sound introduced itself, a low, foundational rumble that seemed to come from the pavement itself. It grew steadily, not with a roar, but with the swelling presence of a rising tide. Heads turned. Conversations faltered. From around the corner onto Westbrook Avenue came the first wave. 2 motorcycles, then 4, then 10. They moved with the slow, deliberate grace of a ceremonial procession. In perfect, staggered formation, they filled the street, a silent, disciplined column of chrome and black leather. 57 bikes in total. As they reached the school, they split into 2 lines, peeling off with practiced precision to park along both curbs, creating a wide, protected corridor leading directly to the main entrance. The engines were cut to a low, respectful idle, a sound more like a collective purr than a threat. There was no revving, no shouting, no intimidation. The men and women dismounted, their faces impassive. They simply stood by their machines, a silent, unmovable wall of watchful guardians. Sarah Jenkins and her cameraman were already in position, their camera broadcasting the incredible scene live. Parents pulling up in minivans slowed to a stop, their faces a mixture of confusion and awe. Students walking to school froze, their phones immediately coming out to record the silent spectacle. At 7:25 a.m., Kyle Brogan and his friends arrived. They swaggered onto the sidewalk, laughing and shoving each other, their usual morning ritual of asserting dominance. They took 3 steps into the corridor of bikes and stopped dead. The laughter died in their throats. Their faces went pale. The casual arrogance evaporated, replaced by a sudden, jarring understanding of consequence. They looked at the faces of the bikers, men whose eyes held the quiet weight of experience, men who were utterly unimpressed by high school bravado. The bullies huddled together, suddenly looking very small and very young. At 7:30 a.m., Daniel's blue sedan turned onto the street. As he pulled to a stop at the head of the corridor, Sarge and 2 other riders detached from the line and walked to his car. Sarge, a man whose quiet authority seemed to bend the air around him, opened the passenger door for Maya. She looked out at the sea of leather vests and stoic faces, her eyes wide with a mixture of terror and wonder. She looked at her dad, who gave her a single, reassuring nod. "It's okay," he whispered. "They're with us." Sarge leaned down slightly, his voice gentle. "We're just here to make sure you have a safe walk to school, young lady." That's all. Maya took a deep breath and stepped out of the car. Her father took her hand. Together, flanked by Sarge and the other 2 riders, they began the walk toward the school doors. The bikers did not move or speak. They simply stood, their presence a powerful, silent declaration. This child is protected. This ground is safe. The message was clear, delivered not with a shout, but with the undeniable force of collective, disciplined resolve. The front doors of Northgate High burst open, and Vice Principal Thompson marched out, his face a blotchy mask of crimson indignation. He pointed a trembling finger at the assembly. "What is the meaning of this? This is private property. You are intimidating my students. I'm calling the police." He directed his fury at Sarge, who stood calmly beside Daniel and Maya. Sarge met his gaze without blinking, his posture relaxed but his presence immovable. "No one is being intimidated, sir," Sarge replied, his voice even and clear, carrying easily in the quiet morning air. "We are American citizens, peacefully assembled on a public street. We are here to witness this young lady's safe passage into a public institution where she has a right to an education without fear. A right which, until now, has not been guaranteed." The word witness hung in the air, a carefully chosen term that shifted the dynamic entirely. They were not vigilantes. They were observers, holding the system accountable. Before Thompson could sputter a response, Sarah Jenkins stepped forward, a microphone in her hand, her cameraman focusing a tight shot on the flustered administrator. "Mr. Thompson," she began, her tone professionally sharp. "Sarah Jenkins, Channel 8 News. Are you suggesting that the school has been unable to provide a safe environment for this student? We have obtained records of multiple formal complaints filed by her father, Mr. Alastair, that have gone unanswered. Can you comment on the district's failure to act?" Thompson's eyes widened in panic. The confrontation he had expected to manage in the privacy of his office was now playing out on live television. His authority was gone, replaced by the harsh glare of public scrutiny. As if on cue, another parent, a woman who had been watching from her car, got out and approached the reporter. "He's right," she said, her voice shaking but firm. "I've complained 3 times about my son being targeted by the same group of boys. They told me it was just boys being boys and that my son needed to toughen up." Another parent joined her, then another. The single story of Maya's torment became a chorus of systemic negligence. The wall of communal silence, built on fear and frustration, was crumbling brick by brick. Daniel, who had remained silent throughout the exchange, now stepped forward. He didn't raise his voice. He simply held up the thick manila folder for the camera to see. He opened it, showing the pages of documented evidence. The emails, the call logs, the photo of the cracked window. "This is my evidence," he said, his voice raw with a father's pain but steady with conviction. "I did everything I was supposed to do. I followed every rule. No one would listen." The image was devastatingly powerful. A quiet, determined father holding a meticulously compiled record of an institution's failure, surrounded by a silent legion of veterans who had come to stand where the system had not. Miles away, in his downtown office, the school superintendent was watching the broadcast on his office television, his phone already ringing with calls from concerned school board members. The carefully constructed facade of administrative competence had been publicly and irrevocably shattered. The truth, backed by evidence and witnessed by the community, was finally having its day. That evening, the Northgate District School Board convened an emergency session. The sterile, wood-paneled boardroom, usually half empty, was packed to capacity. Parents, teachers, and concerned citizens filled every seat and lined the walls. In the back, standing in silent formation, were 30 members of the Iron Guardians. They wore no patches, just their simple leather vests, a quiet but potent reminder of the morning's events. Their presence charged the room with a sense of gravity and purpose. Daniel Alastair stood at the podium, not as an angry, emotional father, but as a calm, credible witness. He didn't speak of tears or fear. He spoke of process and evidence. With Sarah Jenkins' news camera recording every word, he walked the board through his folder, page by page. He presented the timeline of harassment, the dates of his calls and meetings, the printed proof of the vicious cyberbullying, and the dismissive, canned responses from the administration. He concluded with a large, clear photograph of Maya's shattered bedroom window projected on the screen behind him. My daughter's safety was compromised in her own home because this school and this district refused to take action, he said, his voice devoid of accusation, stating it as a simple, documented fact. I followed your procedures. When do our children get to benefit from them? The parents of Kyle Brogan and his friends were in the front row. They looked pale and ashamed, forced to confront the public consequences of their son's actions and perhaps their own denial. After a tense, closed-door session, the board returned with the superintendent at the front. His face was grim. He announced that Kyle and the other 2 boys were suspended indefinitely, pending a mandatory disciplinary hearing and enrollment in a behavioral therapy program. He then looked directly at Daniel and Maya, who sat in the front row. Mr. Alastair, Maya, he said, his voice heavy with contrition. On behalf of this district, I offer you our most profound and sincere apology. We failed you. We failed in our most fundamental duty to provide a safe learning environment. There is no excuse. He announced that Vice Principal Thompson had been placed on immediate administrative leave pending a full investigation into his handling of this and other bullying cases. The final announcement was the most significant. The district was immediately dissolving its current, ineffective anti-bullying policy. In its place, they would be forming a new, community-led oversight committee to design and implement a zero-tolerance program. It would include a third-party, anonymous reporting system, ensuring that no student or parent would ever be dismissed again. In honor of the catalyst for this change, the superintendent announced it would be called the Aurelia Initiative. Justice was being delivered, not in a shadowy backroom, but in the full, unforgiving light of public accountability. The next morning, Maya walked toward the school entrance. The corridor of bikers was gone. She walked alone with her father a few steps behind. But she wasn't alone. As she walked, students she had never spoken to before nodded at her. A girl from her art class gave her a small, shy smile. Someone whispered, "I'm glad you're okay." The fear that had been her constant companion was gone, replaced by a tentative, fragile sense of peace. Her dignity, stolen and trampled, had been returned to her, piece by piece, by a father who refused to give up and a community that finally chose to stand. Months melted into a new school year, one defined not by fear, but by change. The Aurelia Initiative, born from a moment of public confrontation, had become a resounding success. The third-party reporting system, managed by a child advocacy group, was processing cases with transparency and speed. Bullying incidents at Northgate High dropped by 70% in the first semester. School districts from neighboring states began calling, asking for the blueprint, hoping to replicate the model. The story of the quiet father and the silent bikers had become a small legend, a modern parable about how lawful, collective action could achieve what bureaucratic inertia could not. The Iron Guardians MC became an unlikely national symbol for child advocacy. Chapters across the country, inspired by Sarge's Code Aurelia, formed their own bikers against bullying divisions. Their mission was always the same: peaceful, protective presence. They never engaged in threats or violence. They worked with parents to document evidence, and their silent escorts became a powerful tool to force schools and law enforcement to act. They were creating safe spaces for the system to finally do its job. On a crisp autumn Saturday, Daniel and Sarge sat at an outdoor cafe, drinking coffee. Daniel's garage, now more prosperous than ever, was the primary sponsor of a new citywide youth art program. "Never thought I'd see my shop's logo on a flyer for a watercolor class," Daniel said with a small smile. Sarge chuckled, a low rumble in his chest. "Strength has many forms, my friend. So does service." Maya was no longer the timid, haunted girl who hid behind her sketchbook. She was blossoming. She had joined the school paper as an illustrator and was leading a peer support group for new students. Her art had taken on a new confidence and power. That afternoon, they all attended the opening of the Future Voices art exhibit at the City Gallery. Maya's piece was the star of the show, hung in the most prominent position. It was a large charcoal and graphite drawing, executed with breathtaking detail. It depicted a magnificent bald eagle, its eyes fierce and protective, its wings spread wide. It was perched not on a branch, but on the gleaming chrome handlebars of a motorcycle. The detail was so precise you could see the reflection of a cloudy sky in the mirror. The plaque beside it was simple. Title: Guardian's Artist, Maya Alistair. The legacy of that one Monday morning was not just a new policy or a reform school district. It was in the confident stroke of a young artist's pencil. It was in the newfound courage of students who now spoke up against injustice. It was in the quiet understanding that a community's strength is measured by how it protects its most vulnerable. The final image of this transformation was a small, intimate one. In the Iron Guardian's clubhouse, a woman was carefully sewing a new patch onto Sarge's vest, just below his military service ribbons. It was a small, circular patch, intricately embroidered. It depicted a single, stylized silver wing, modeled directly from one of Maya's early bird sketches. It was the official emblem of the Aurelia Initiative, a symbol now adopted by every Guardians chapter involved in the program. It was a permanent reminder that the loudest roar is not always the most powerful, and that true honor lies in the quiet, unwavering, and disciplined defense of a single, fragile life.